Today I wanted to talk about some of the data visualizations that we created with our access to StreetLight, kind of looking at what is the connection between land use, transportation, and equity. So what is the problem we wanted to look at? There's all this national data that's out there. According to Smart Growth America, low-income communities are disproportionately affected by unsafe streets. I think Native American communities are 8 times as likely to be hit by a car on a highway as white communities, and people of color feel significantly less safe traveling by bicycle than white males in the US. Then there's this fact that it's estimated 30% of Americans don't drive. So we have a transportation system that potentially isn't meeting the needs of these individuals. So we really wanted to kind of dig into this and look at, okay, where are most people riding? If 30% of Americans don't drive, what does that actually look like? Where are most of them riding their bikes or walking? And where are these other population groups existing that are disproportionately affected by the way that we've built up our streets? And one of the big issues, sort of fundamental to all of these questions, is, at least in the Utah context, a lot of what we're building, if you look at this map, the darker areas are the higher income areas, and then the lighter are the lower income areas. If you look at this map and you look at those bright purple lines, that's where some of our major sort of regional bicycle transportation facilities exist. So they're actually going through these higher income areas. And the rationale for that is the belief that most people are actually riding bicycles for recreational purposes. And some of the data sets that we use across the state prior to StreetLight were very recreational focused. And so it was telling a certain story. And so I wanted to look at, okay, looking at less sort of recreational slanted data, looking at kind of more objective data like we have at, through StreetLight. I wanted to see what is the story that gets told through that data. And so consistently, what we found is that people were using their bicycles for utilitarian purposes, which I thought was really interesting. So this really high geometry that you're seeing in this visualization is right in an area where there's a lot of commercial, there's some grocery stores, there is a mall, there's all kinds of different things. So if you think from a land use perspective, it has a lot of diversity of options that you can go to in this area. So it's going to be attractive to a lot of different people. There's everything from jobs, to all these other things. There's a university in the area. So, but I want you to actually see what this area looks like for somebody who's bicycling. This is what it looks like. So the #1 place in this city, Orem, that people are riding their bikes looks like this. So that's for me, that's pretty problematic, because I've actually rode on this. When I went to college here, I would actually ride on this almost daily, and it was very uncomfortable and it felt very unsafe. So kind of that same idea that we looked at other communities. So up there in the top left-hand corner, that's Orem, the community we just looked at. This is Provo. It's kind of the same situation. This bright spot is their urban core. So that's where a lot of the shopping is happening. A lot of the university students are around this area. And as you get to these outskirts, that's more of the suburban areas where you don't have those diversity of options and the density. So going back to that whole idea of land use. In Springville, you find the same thing. So this is their sort of quasi-urban core. And the other interesting thing, going back to this whole idea of recreation, on most of these maps, you can actually see the ridership illustrated in these visualizations. So on this right-hand side, this line heading up there, it looks like it's heading up a canyon. That's a recreational facility. So that's not to say that if you build a recreational facility that people won't ride it. But the reality is, if you think about those 30% of Americans who don't drive their cars, that they're going to find a way to get where they're going, whether or not there's a facility there. So it can become somewhat despotic for these people, and that's what we're actually seeing here. So if you're looking at kind of like what I was saying before, it's interesting if you look at the census tracts and then you look at where most people are riding their bikes. Income seems to be a big indicator of where people are riding their bikes. So this is, it sort of, the shape actually matches up pretty precisely. And we started comparing some of this data. So we were exporting it and looking at median household income and looking at where people were riding, and we found this negative correlation. So basically, the more money you make in these communities, the less likely you are to ride a bike. So in a lot of ways, for me, that seems to say that recreation isn't where most of this riding is happening. And we also, I guess one other thing, we also looked at things like race, and we found those same correlations. So in a lot of the places where people were riding, it was actually where racial minorities were living. So there's this kind of continued nexus between these different groups and equity and where they're riding and the lack of appropriate facilities for the type of transportation they're creating or doing. So how we did this, we just did a modular analysis and looked at the zone activity, and we created these hexagons, like a hexagon mesh in ArcGIS, and then just exported that into StreetLight and created those visualizations, which I think are a great way of kind of showing the activity.